Good morning, everyone. So today is Monday, start of our new week, and this week's theme is going to be biography. So biography, you can look at it as being two smaller words put together, bio and graphy. Bio, B-I-O, means life, and graphy means written. So this means writing of life writing. And so it's stories of people's lives. So this week we're going to learn about 5 different women and their stories and how they persevered, how they kept going in times that were really hard. And hopefully we can learn from each of them. So we're going to start with our mindful moment of just finding our mindful bodies, sitting up straight, finding our anchor spot where we can notice our breath. We're going to breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And just check in with yourself how you feel. In a moment, I'll play the sound of the bell, and you can listen for the sound. So today, the biography we're going to read about is the story of Ruby Bridges. So written by Robert Coles, illustrated by George Ford. Apologies for the writing. My beautiful nephew I love, decided to write on this when he was practicing learning how to write his name. So the story of Ruby Bridges. First, a bit from her mother in the beginning. Our Ruby taught us all a lot. She became someone who helped change our country. She was part of history, just like generals and presidents are part of history. They're leaders, and so was Ruby. She led us away from hate, and she led us nearer to knowing each other. The white folks and the black folks. Ruby's mother. So this story takes place in the 50s and 60s in the United States, back when a time when schools were something called segregated, that the color of your skin meant which school you went to. Is this fair? Not at all. So we're going to learn about when those schools started coming together and some of the first students that had that experience. So Ruby Bridges is one of the first to go into schools in New Orleans. So, Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My daddy, he worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick up the crops. So my daddy lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think. Have you ever moved? How do you think Ruby feels right now, 4 years old, having to move? Maybe scared or worried, maybe excited. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. But after they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work, scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. They wanted her children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At that time, white children and black children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDonald 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to 1st grade in the William France Elementary School. Only 6 years old. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church, And we sat there and prayed, Ruby's mother said. We prayed we'd be strong, we'd have courage, we'd get through any trouble, and Ruby would be a good girl and hold her head up high. That she'd be a credit to her own people and a credit to the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the France Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police, they didn't help Ruby. The President of the United States had to order federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. How do you think Ruby felt? How would you feel? Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the French school surrounded by marshals. Wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail, Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street, men and women and children, shouting at her. They pushed towards her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. So when Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with, to learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and worked hard at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, an empty building. Sometimes, her teacher said, I'd look at her and wonder how she did it. How she went by those mobs of those angry people and then sat here all by herself, and yet seemed so relaxed, so comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was nervous or afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she'd gradually begin to wear down, or even decide she no longer wanted to go to school. Then, one morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did. She was watching Ruby walk towards the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped. Right in front of the mob of howling, screaming adults, she stood there facing all those men and women. It seemed that she was talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what could she be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into school. When she came into the class, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby she'd been watching, and she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. I didn't stop and talk with them, she said. Ruby, I saw you talking, Mrs. Henry said. I saw your lips moving. I wasn't talking, said Ruby. I was praying. I was praying for them. Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. Please, God, try to forgive those people. Because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So the end. There's a little bit of text I'm going to read you about what happened to Ruby and to her school later. So, later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at the France Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they should be in the school learning. The mob became very angry when the first white students went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands, one parent said. It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for all children's right to go to school and get their education. They all did get their education, Ruby and a growing number of students who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in 2nd grade, the angry mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools be desegregated so children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the France school. She graduated from it and went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a contractor and has 4 sons. She's now a successful businesswoman, and she's created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation with its focus on education, community, and the future of our nation's children. So, the end, the story of Ruby Bridges, and we can learn a lot from her. So for her faith was important for her. We don't all share the same faith, and that's okay. But regardless of what faith, what practice your family has, it's important to practice this idea of forgiveness if you can. It's hard. It's not easy to actually show love for people that are actively hating you. It's really difficult, and it's not easy, and not everyone can do it, and that's okay. But Ruby did, and I think it's important we try to learn from that. We try to show love even in times when people are just being so cruel, and respond in that way. Respond with love, with kindness, with forgiveness, if we can, when we can. So, for that, I bid you all adieu for today, and we'll learn about someone else tomorrow. But I love you all. Remember that we might be able to be a bit of Ruby Bridges, that we can find that strength within us, that we can hold our head up high even when people are maybe saying mean things to us, that we know all we can control is ourselves. Unfortunately, we can't control other people around us. We can't control their anger. All we can do is control our own anger, our own love, our own emotions. And even that isn't easy. So have a beautiful day. I love you all, and I'll see you tomorrow.